All right, let's kick off this explainer with a pretty wild historical coincidence. On November 22nd, 1963, the entire world was completely fixated on the tragic assassination of President John F. Kennedy. But on that exact same day, the literary and theological giant C.S. Lewis also died. And you know what? His passing went almost completely unnoticed by the press. It's just a really striking reminder of how massive global events can entirely overshadow profound intellectual and spiritual shifts happening right alongside them. So welcome to today's explainer. We're going to explore how 20th century Christian thought wasn't just something academics quietly debated in dusty classrooms. No, these ideas actively collided with massive world-altering crises. We're looking at a period where theology literally became a matter of life, death, and global survival. Here is our roadmap for today. We're covering 4 key areas: the cost of grace, confronting the state, the Second Vatican Council, and finally, the postmodern challenge. Let's jump right in. Section 1. The cost of grace. The theologian Dietrich Bonhoeffer gave us this fascinating contrast between two fundamentally opposed views of faith. On one side, you've got cheap grace. This is basically treating forgiveness as just an intellectual concept, an agreement with a doctrine with absolutely no real-world life changes required. It's a cheap cover-up. But against that, he places costly grace. And costly grace isn't just an idea. It demands absolutely everything from a person, even their own life. And you can really see the core of this in his famous book, The Cost of Discipleship. He emphatically declares that costly grace is the very incarnation of God. I mean, it's called costly because it literally cost God the life of his son, right? So it certainly can't be cheap for us. His argument is that it justifies the sinner, but it absolutely condemns the sin. Now, here's a bit of a curveball. Bonhoeffer actually really disliked the concept of religion. To him, that word implied a human effort, like people doing all these religious tasks trying to climb up a ladder and find God. Instead, he advocated for this idea of a religionless Christianity. In this view, the whole narrative flips. It's not about us finding God. It's about God actively finding us. Grace initiates the whole thing, not our human striving. Which brings us to Section 2, confronting the state. Because Bonhoeffer fiercely believed that this world is inherently good and created by God. He argued that you can't just escape it. You don't just run away and hide in a monastery. You have to encounter the world in 3 distinct ways. First, through prayer, keeping the creation in mind. Second, through suffering, which he saw as the totally natural consequence of speaking the truth in a broken world. And third, through vocation. He believed that all everyday jobs and callings are equally worthy ways to actually participate in society. But, and this is a massive question, what do you do when a government goes completely off the rails? What happens when a state acts as an ungovernment, like the Nazis did? Well, Bonhoeffer didn't flinch. He laid out 3 escalating steps for ethical resistance. Step 1, have the courage to remind the state of its limits. Step 2, actively bind up the wounds of the victims of that state. And step 3, if it comes down to it, you put a spoke in the wheel. He explains this using an incredibly visceral, high-stakes metaphor. Imagine a madman is driving a car down a crowded street, swerving and running innocent people over. Your job isn't just to stand on the sidewalk and bandage the people who get hit. No way. You have to jump into the car and forcefully wrestle the wheel away from the madman to stop the machine entirely. And the thing is, he wasn't just speaking hypothetically. He applied this directly to the Nazi regime. He believed it was absolutely crucial to stand with marginalized victims, specifically the Jewish people at that time. He took this theology so seriously that he actively participated in a plot to assassinate Adolf Hitler. He literally tried to put a spoke in the wheel of the Nazi machine, an act of costly grace that ultimately cost him his own life. All right, shifting gears from World War II, let's jump into Section 3, the Second Vatican Council. Fast forward to 1958, Pope John the 23rd gets elected, and everyone basically thought, okay, he's older, he's just going to be a caretaker pope. The assumption was he'd just quietly maintain the status quo until they found a long-term leader. But surprise, he was anything but a caretaker. He completely revolutionized the Roman Catholic Church, exploding it right out of its historical bubble and directly into the modern world. And consider the timing of this. We are talking about an era of immense global terror. In October 1962, the Cuban Missile Crisis literally brought the US and the Soviets to the brink of nuclear war. People were holding their breath. Amidst that terrifying reality, the Pope used his massive platform to issue Pacem in Terris, peace on earth. He was advocating for global cooperation to avoid nuclear annihilation, and right on the heels of that, he convened the earth-shattering Second Vatican Council. The sheer scale of what Vatican II changed is just mind-blowing. I mean, they shifted the Mass from Latin, which, let's be honest, most everyday people couldn't understand, into local, everyday languages. Plus, it opened up this unprecedented dialogue, not just with Protestants, but with non-Christian faiths like Judaism and Islam, too. It also sparked a massive wave of biblical scholarship. Suddenly, lay people were encouraged to actually read the Bible for themselves, which was incredibly rare before this. And it opened the floor for the church to debate previously taboo topics: women's roles, birth control, the charismatic movement. The Catholic Church simply was not the same after this point. Which brings us to our final stop today, Section 4, the Postmodern Challenge. To really understand the world we're living in today, we have to track a huge philosophical shift. Back in the 18th century, the Enlightenment gave us this absolute confidence that human reason could make sense of everything. Then, the 19th century brings in modernism, which uses that reason to aggressively critique traditional doctrines. And finally, boom, we hit the 20th and 21st centuries, postmodernism. So what is postmodernism exactly? Well, the crucial point here is that it actually loses all that Enlightenment confidence in reason. It argues that reason alone just can't give us a solid moral groundwork. And that results in a culture characterized by a sharp rebellion against authority, whether that's the church, the Bible, or institutions, and a heavy, heavy lean into relativism. In this kind of worldview, the whole idea of an overarching mega story, like one single unifying narrative about reality, is just completely tossed out the window. There is no universal authority beyond your own personal thoughts. It's replaced entirely by extreme relativism, where everybody is essentially just doing their own thing. Because of this, modern thinkers and theologians are deeply split into three distinct camps. Camp 1 says, throw doctrine out entirely, because it's a mega story that postmodernism simply won't accept. Camp 2 says, fight to retain it, arguing it's the only way to hold on to historical truth. And Camp 3 tries to constantly test its validity, checking to see if the doctrine actually makes sense and provides cohesion when measured against modern culture. Take a look at this quote. I think it perfectly captures the tension we're living in right now. It highlights this deeply personal desire for an individual, totally customizable narrative, clashing head-on with the historical weight of objective truth. It is the ultimate collision between my truth and the truth. So, wrapping up this explainer, I want to leave you with a pretty vital question. As you navigate a world completely saturated in relativism, what actually drives your actions? If there isn't a mega story, what gives your personal story meaning? And maybe more importantly, if the real world demands it, and the state acts as a madman once again, are you prepared to grab the wheel?